Nindijnakas Badabin, Nindu de Makwa. Hello, my name is Rory Erler Wakemup. If you search Edgar Heap of Birds on the World Wide Web, you will find a prolific artist, an acclaimed scholar with an impressive list of accolades. But I'd like to introduce him in a different manner that you might not be able to see online or elsewhere. I first met Edgar in my undergrad almost 10 years ago. I was going through a paradigm shift in my art while going through very large commitment in ceremonies. And in talking with Edgar, he was a guest artist in town for our senior critiques. We kind of hashed out the confusion of expressing the inherent values of being native without doing it in kind of a kitsch or cliche manner and maintaining integrity. And then right after that, there was a group critique where Shanna and Edgar helped me to articulate to my peers and professors the relevance of the work I was doing as it pertained to contemporary art and Native identity. And that carried me into grad school when I decided to kind of flip the script and take it to another level of another paradigm shift. And at that time, I reached out to Edgar and Shanna once again, and they really gave me just succinct, pertinent information that was very powerful without being over the top. So that can really explain his artwork. That same kind of relationship to who he is as a person. This is very succinct, to the point, and very powerful without being over the top. So it is my honor to introduce a man I look up to as a role model, Edgar Heap of Birds, everyone.
Well, thanks for the introduction. Wonderful to have this forum today, and I want to start in a couple of ways for protocol, but I want to offer this prayer tobacco back to Rory for that introduction. So, and then later I brought a card. I've been working with the Wichita Nations in Texas, and there's cards for everybody. One of my monoprints I did this year. So if you'd like to have one, please come later and pick one up. I dedicate the talk today to Indigenous women, and they've carried us a long way. They've carried us really far, and it's been a hard road. So my grandma here, Hoetziot, lightning woman, heap of birds, redbird howling crane, and so I dedicate all this, what we offer today, to Indigenous women. I want to make acknowledgments, the most important acknowledgments. I want to acknowledge the water. We're on the river here that flows through this continent. Very important, and it starts here north of here. I want to also acknowledge the rock, the mountains. But here we're very, very fortunate, and we can't go on any day without it, is the pipestone that's here, the rock that's here, that all the prayers that we all send throughout the whole continent, comes from here. So really, really pleased to be here where that red stone is. And then I want to also acknowledge the animals that are our guides, whether on the land, in the air, in the water. They're communicators to us, and you need to listen. And they're a barometer as to how this earth is doing. So we really have a lot to do with looking up to these animals that can guide us. And then lastly, the sky, the stars, and the way this earth moves, the way the sun moves, We need to know about the solstice, the equinox. We need to know about all these changes and keep them, in mind as you move around this land. If you're in your car or if you're at the mall, wherever you are, think about this sky. So I start out with Grandma Hoetzialt, and she's holding her daughter Dorothy, and she'd later have a son, Charles. He will be named Many Magpies, and that will be my father. So I want to start with Grandma Alice, Lightning Woman. Her husband is Guy Heap of Birds. He's the young man here on the very end with the war bonnet. His dad, Black Wolf, Alfred Heap of Birds. His wife, the matriarch, Grace Big Bear, and all his family there. And then going back to Black Wolf's father, Moyuhan Haaskus, many magpie birds together, Heap of Birds, the chief, and he was a prisoner of war in Fort Marion, Florida, after the Ouachita Massacre. Colonel Custer massacred the Cheyenne Nation, where I'm from, where I live in Oklahoma, where I'm going home tonight. We're looking forward to that, going back to Oklahoma. But that's where he's from. That's where he fought, and because of that, he was taken as prisoner of war. I made a painting years ago when I was in grad school, just out of grad school, called Fort Marion Lizards, and I found a list of names. All these names are from Captain Pratt, their jailer, and so Heap of Birds at the top of the list. Heap of Birds at the time, Bear Shill, Mahnimik, and he was one of the 4 principal chiefs of the Cheyenne Nation. His son, Black Wolf, was the leader of the Elk Warrior Society, and that's what I do. I'm a leader of the Elk Warrior Society. We'll meet probably on Tuesday in the teepee, the Elk Society and the Bowstring Society. They were first gathered up after the massacre. There was a truce, but they were not allowed to surrender. They were put onto a wagon, then a train, which was taken throughout the U.S. and ended up in Florida, in Fort Marion, the fort there in St. Augustine, Florida. And there they were brutalized, they were indoctrinated. Some died. They shot one on the way, killed a man named Graybeard. And here they are when they first arrived, demoralized. They were held hostage by the USA. And so all this art that we're making, I'm going to show you why we make it. Shannon was wonderful to show us Billy War Soldier and some of my mentors, some of my colleagues. But I'm going to show you why it comes out the way it does and our stance of resistance, but to also heal. They also had their haircut, and this is Captain Pratt here on this side, their jailer. And so there was this whole system of to eliminate the native man, the leadership. But all this time, there were 3 forts back on the reservation, so you didn't know they were going to kill all our leaders, which befell that tragic thing had happened here in Mankato. I'll talk about later at the end of my talk. But Captain Pratt was so successful in his indoctrination and his brutal regime, he was given his own school. It was called Carlisle Indian School. He was the president of Carlisle Indian School. So then that apparatus became a governmental program that went around America. So there were boarding schools created to do what he did to the native people. This is a great drawing from a prisoner of war, POW. His name is Bear's Heart. He was Cheyenne. And it gives you a really strong image of the kind of this straight line advance of the soldiers, the horses, and guns coming across the prairie to advance to dominate native people. A really wonderful drawing. And this was all done while in prison, so really, really very, very brave art to be done. I find that this kind of incarceration without charges, without laws, without courts, has come to pass again, America's tradition, in Guantanamo Bay. Again, dominating these men, these citizens that are disliked by the Republic with no charges, with no courts, in secret. So we don't know what happened to our warriors in Fort Marion either. And so I want to acknowledge these men that are in Guantanamo, today. I've been at the fort in Florida, and I have to say that I would promote this idea that to be a native artist is to be insistent. You have to insist to deploy. That you're not often invited to deploy. It's not a trait or a style. You're in the mix. We have to insist that we deploy. And so I was at the fort, and I insisted that we shut the fort down for part of the day, and maybe it was a request, but to the park rangers, and here they are, kind of nervous, looking at me with my pipe, but we had never had a fire and a prayer inside of that fort for all the warriors that had passed through there as prisoners of war, and some died there. They're buried there. There's mass graves there. So I was there to give the prayer, and I did conduct that prayer. I was able to show this piece in my walkthrough in Jimmy's show from 1877, Woo-Haw. Kiowa artists. There were also Kiowas imprisoned, Apaches, Comanches, Arapahoes. Just like Guantanamo, they would just gather everyone up and held them hostage so they could make their way with their land holdings. But here he's perplexed by these two choices of the beef on the left and the cow on the right. And at his feet you have the church and cultivated fields, and then you have the more natural landscape and the teepee lodge. And then the buffaloes and the cows are blowing medicine toward him. He's got the pipes together. They're assembled to pray. So he has to choose where he should be. And again, I mentioned this the other night, but we all have the same choice in a sense: the natural world, the mechanized world, the environment, or the machine. What shall we do? Jimmy and I have been having a parallel or intersecting career in our association, and I'll show a couple of his pieces that I think are very important. The work that's here in the show about the choices. It says, choose any three. And then he has these phrases, the crazy horse, Ho Chi Minh, and so on. And so he made that work with these listing of leaders that he was looking at. That's very important. He and I also worked on a project, major exhibition with David Hammonds in Ohio at the Wexner Center. And there I created billboards, and it was very provocative or kind of funny in a way, but we were in Columbus, Ohio. And so that can be kind of a neutral name, but not to me, not to most Native people. Columbus, Ohio is like a freaky place because like, why is it Columbus, Ohio? And what does that mean? So I took it as an issue to discuss, so pre-Columbian, pre-Hispanic, pre-American. And then the Native spirit or the indigenous spirit is always has a link back to some other non-Native representation, whether it's Hispania or America or Colombia, And so I wanted to say that our spirits are indigenous. They're not pre-Columbian. Here's the Serpent Mound, just outside of Columbus. And we traveled there. It's wonderful to go and encounter that magnificent spirit site. And it's right there at the edge of two rivers that come together. So it's really, for me, a lot about the water, of course, the way water moves, inland streams and rivers. And so we got a lot of power from that site. And Jimmy made a wonderful sculpture. I think it's his best work he has ever done. Was his serpent piece that came into the gallery. And when he came up this step, it pretty much was a scary experience for everybody. They walked up this step, and there was a big, giant PVC snake at the top of the stairs. And it had horns. It was sort of like a burnt wood form. But he used the tubing that would carry large water. But, of course, now it's got a kind of interesting reference to oil, moving petroleum through the world. And that's what we're fighting now is the petroleum moving through these pipes. So you have sort of the good snake, bad snake situation, and then you see it go by, and it was inside of the gallery. So we all had installations inside the space, and it's a wonderful show called Willpower. So check it out. I think in '92, perhaps. And that snake, the serpent, all these spirits I mentioned in the beginning, the animals, they could almost be seen as grandfathers. They're leaders, they're teachers. So Numshum is grandfather in Cheyenne. So it's one of my monoprints. I've been doing a lot of monoprints. And so, of course, going back to my family and Heap of Birds and Black Wolf and many magpies, grandfather. I was really very happy and surprised to actually encounter a howling wolf's drawing from the prisoner of war experience in Florida. And it's a larger drawing and pretty complex with the warrior societies parading in, and then other histories of horses moving through. And so you have four chiefs here with their war bonnets. So it could be that one of those was Heap of Birds. But I encountered this drawing in Hawaii, at the University of Hawaii, while the Honolulu Art Museum, where I was exhibiting and making my printmaking. So I do find that my life and the spirit of what we do intersects, because it should be that way, and we follow what we find. And I'll show you a little bit more about this drawing in a moment. The warrior societies are very important: the bowstring, elk, kit fox, dog soldier. The four societies of the Cheyenne Nation to defend and protect the tribal citizens. And here we are dancing, kind of a community event by my mother's house. And I do have four instructors: Paul Peakhart, Roy Dean Bullcoming, Vernon Bullcoming, and Jasper Wache. So Roy mentioned a little bit about my accolades, but they're more academic on the internet. But I've had four instructors for 4 years, 16 years of instruction to go and do what I do next week on the reservation. And Roy Dean's next to me there, dancing to my left. So this brotherhood and this fellowship with Warrior Society members, it goes on every week, and so it's really wonderful to have that back home. When I showed at the Honolulu Art Museum, I was asked if I wanted to show with Howling Wolf, and it was just a wonderful opportunity. And so I showed my Dead Indian stories, and I have a series of about 30 or 40 prints, all on native death and survival. And so here are some of the prints, and they're all monotypes. And I print in Santa Fe, also in Santa Monica at Josephine Press, but also I've been invited to the University of Hawaii to print as well. But here are some details. Some of you may remember that when Obama was so happy with Hillary Clinton, in the Situation Room, they were hunting bin Laden, and they cheered and were so all smiles when they said, "Geronimo's dead." And so Geronimo was a code name for bin Laden. So then there you have it in America. It's recent history. It would name the most feared terrorist an Apache name. So as the Indians are still targets. Sand Creek, Washita River, Sandy Hook. Can we mourn all the deaths of all the youth, the children, from Shivington at Sand Creek in Colorado to Custer at Washita to the deranged young man who killed the kindergartners in Connecticut? The rivers is where they found the Cheyenne people. They waited till they camped and for fresh water. Then they attacked them at the water source. So Sand Creek, Washita River. The kids were running on the water when they were killed. And as I said before, there are three forts: Fort Cantonment, Fort Reno, and Fort Supply were built to dominate and enslave the Cheyenne people. And so there were three forts built, but we were never safe. And I take this discourse back to Europe and lay it at their doorstep, because certainly America isn't the beginning of the brutality against Native people on this hemisphere. You can go back to France, to Spain, to Russia on the west side, by Alaska, and the British, obviously. So I look back to when the British came to occupy this continent, And I had an exhibit with other artists, British artists, Canadian artists, called Wanu Territories. And so I created it was an ecological exhibit. So I created a 30-foot banner, and I used these symbols as the border. The biohazard, which many of the deaths that came were from just diseases, obviously. And then this is actually a sanctioned Christian cross, but it doubles as a knife, a dagger, and that's from archives. So I placed this at near King's Cross Station, St. Pancras Station, where the Eurostar goes to Brussels. And so I really want to draw attention to the European Union, but its domination of Native people in this hemisphere. The money, the gold, the resources that are at the Vatican, are from Mexico. They're from Peru. They're from this hemisphere. The wealth was taken back to Europe and still fuels Europe's banks, what they took from this hemisphere. The resources, and even the slavery and the wheat and whatnot. So we put this up there at by St. Pancras Station. And I had a professor, an anthropologist, do research for me, and he identified between 25 million and 100 million lives lost as what they called offhandedly contact. So from contact in this hemisphere, we lost 100 million people. So we took the low number, and I say 25 million lives were lost. So the eco show was somewhat problematic because it was about perhaps trying to have this ecological discourse about overpopulation, but natives don't have overpopulation. We've lost 100 million people, so we need to have more population growth, not less. Much of the work that I do, of course, is informed by the ceremonial life that I can't talk about in great detail in a lecture, but this is a monoprint I made, Pledge, Vow, Fast, Run Under the Sun. And so that experience, that practice of ceremony comes from, for us, and maybe 10, 12 different tribes, from a medicine wheel in the Bighorn Mountains in Wyoming. It's a wonderful site, incredible place, where it's about a 50-foot circle here across here. And it's really an astronomical observatory. It's science. So it's very important to know that the natives are very entrenched in science rather than an image of aesthetic. So here you have some of the identifiable sites on the wheel: Regal, Cirrus, Equinox, Solstice. So this was a very ancient site, and then later it would become a form adopted by about maybe 20 tribes from including Minnesota, going to the Rocky Mountains, the east face of the Rocky Mountains, all the way into Canada. So we have the same religious practice, and I would call it the Earth Renewal. So here is a schematic of the medicine wheel, and of course it's set up with all the different scientific observatory, kind of the vectors that go out to the stars. So you take this form and you lay it on top of these fork trees, and you make the universe acknowledged here with this form. So this body here, this lodge, is now the source for renewing the earth, and we'll be building this next week, and they'll be built. The wheels will be turning all throughout the prairie, all into Manitoba and Saskatchewan, from Oklahoma north. So I've taken that form, the fork pole here, and had the same notated marks on the circle, 50 foot across. This is my sculpture for the Denver Art Museum called Wheel, and it's 12 foot tall, porcelain and steel, and my own notation on the steel with a ink that goes into a big furnace and gets cooked. And it's a very complicated piece, but you can look at it in research if you want to check it out further. But again, as Shanna mentioned, the Wounded Knee, resistance, here's the flag upside down, American distress. And then the fork is here, which you'd put the rafters on top. And there are 10 trees. There were 12, certainly in the ceremonial form, but I was very sensitive and very worried about overreaching my knowledge and divulging too much of it to make a ceremonial instrument. So I actually removed 2 trees. So it doesn't function like the medicine wheel does. And so here's a shot of me in the middle. So it's Denver Art Museum. It's been up for 10 years. And I've taken youth there. A wonderful experience of taking the Cheyenne youth to the site to do drawings also. And at the top, we have the text, which it would have been hard to see, but you had that in Richard Ray's piece that Shanna shared, and it comes from a poster and an exhibit that Gene Fisher and Jimmy Durham curated. We're always turning around on purpose. And so I took that text that we had generated from the exhibit, and the first lady I showed you, Hoitzio, Lightning Woman, she said, "Knock cave ASM." So we're always turning around on purpose. We're always coming back to where we belong. And I used that on my sculpture on the wall at the Denver Art Museum. And so this 50-foot circle is part of the Fort Laramie Treaty, and it was our first treaty with the U.S. government, which we lost that treaty, and we had to move off that territory. But I consider it that we've retaken that 50 feet, and that's still Cheyenne territory, that in downtown Denver, Colorado. They're building a new addition on that space, and I've been in negotiation with the museum, and they've been very happy to move the sculpture to the front of the museum. And I've also requested, along with some of the ceremonial leaders in my tribe, to move 1 foot of the earth with it. So there you can come there in November, and we'll have the Sand Creek Memorial Run, as they have here for the 38. And they'll go there and they'll have a candlelight vigil at my sculpture, and there'll be tears, prayers for those lost in the massacre. And I did not complete the sculpture with the rafters. I left that off. And in my best vision I could have, my wonderful vision I could see ahead, if I could wish that way, that the natives would finish it in their own manner. So this candlelight vigil, they're working with the children, that finishes the roof for me. So, and it's been very active, and I don't encourage them to do these things, but the community has come forward to really adopt this sculpture and to use it almost as a ceremonial site. The medicine wheel has these shapes that are very, very important in terms of the direction, and it's something I wanted to share with everyone today. It's something very useful. You have the X, but it's not the cardinal directions. It's on the axis. So northeast here, the sun rising on the longest day of the year, moving around the earth, setting way in the northwest, like towards Seattle maybe, from Oklahoma. That would be the summer solstice. Then you have the winter solstice, a short day, the sun coming here, like down by Florida, short day, setting by Arizona, or maybe California. So these are the extremes of the sun, and so you need to know that to live here effectively on this continent, because certainly the plants grow with the sun's movement, the animals follow the plants, and we follow the animals too in terms of food source. So that's something we always have, is that axis, the medicine wheel. I've worked with youth with that also. So the art that we do, it operates on many, many levels, and so a major point of that is to share it with youth and elders, and to bring it out of the museum, even out of public art kind of situations, into a workshop situation with youth. And so we made these medicine wheels, and the students were going to finish them by putting their own shapes inside here, their own lives inside. That's one of our buffalo hides. We have a buffalo herd, about 500 buffalo on my reservation. And one of the most magical days in terms of this experience for me happened a few years ago, where they allowed me to pursue this project with 250 Cheyenne Arapaho elders. And they gave me a whole community hall where we have powwows, and they got me acrylic paint and canvases, and I got to be able to explain this medicine wheel form to elders. And certainly it's not that every elder would know ceremonial practice, that they've missed it. So I would be there to help them reacquaint themselves with it. And then I also gave them all, I think I gave them all sweetgrass that day, so they could pray, or they have someone that wanted to pray, they could take that home with them, and the painting. And my mother was there. So this is by the TV at home right now. This painting is like sitting right there by the TV, by her baseball games when she watches baseball. That's right there. So it's wonderful, wonderful day for me to share that with the elders on the reservation. We were in Vancouver. I have a couple of new projects, printmaking projects. One's called Genocide and Democracy, and it was made for the election that just happened recently. So we showed it in the museum. Emily Carr and Vancouver, and Desba was there. My daughter and Shanna was there. And we presented our work there. And then we had a wonderful cultural leader who gave us songs. And so here are 16. I work in 16, so that's one of the numbers. We have that ceremonial number with the earth renewal and the songs, 16 songs. So I work in these sets of 16 prints, or even some of the public art might be in terms of 16. So I have some of the details here, a couple of these, and they're pretty politically motivated. They're based on patriotic songs in America. So America the Beautiful, Star Spangled Banner. I just took those and added my editorial with it. So I'm also very patriotic, you can tell. So U.S. proud democracy after Native genocide. And this goes forward to certainly to have this major paradox in that they would come and they would dominate you, massacre you, and then maybe relocate you to somewhere else, and then welcome you to the democracy to vote. Okay, now you can vote for the president or something. And you've been moved off your territory, you've been decimated in numbers, you're dispersed, and so how can you ever have currency as a citizen in a democracy if you have no group to vote with, So Native Americans are in that situation. And I've been using a solvent, so it's been pretty dynamic working with kind of creating a print with blood. And so they're sitting flat on the plates and on the tables, and so I'm spraying them, and so it pools up like someone got cut or wounded, and then the words emerge out of the print process. So it's a really wonderful process. I mean, I'm getting a lot out of it. This massacre monster, and they sort of drip like little blood droplets to create the text. One of my major projects was for the Venice Biennale '07, and this is a billboard at Marco Polo International Airport. So my work is always moving in different directions, I guess. I'm doing a workshop on the reservation. I might be in Italy. I might be in Asia. I'm working throughout the world on different projects that I feel are meaningful. And this was dealing with Buffalo Bill Cody, and he came to Europe with his Wild West shows, and he took warriors out of prison. They were out in a prison in Chicago called Fort Sheridan, which was actually built to dominate Union workers in Chicago. They had a cavalry there, an army there. So he was there to take them out of the prison, and then they were put into a Wild West show in Europe. And so it was after Wounded Knee, and so it was very kind of interesting, again, choice like Jimmy's piece or my Wuhall slide. What should I do? I can either be dominated by the U.S. Army, stay in prison, have another Wounded Knee incident, or go to this place called Europe and be a show Indian. So many of them went to Europe. And so I've listed some of the names of the warriors that went here. And these are children. There were actually 2 boys and 2 girls. In the sense of this list are those that died. So Buffalo Bill mistreated them, and there were about 20 that died. So when I went to Europe, went to Italy, I knew they came to Venice to have a promotional tour for their show that was going to be in Verona. And so I was there to actually remember their experience as show Indians coming to Europe. And of course, if you know the Venice Biennale, the spectacle of Buffalo Bill is kind of like the Venice Biennale. It's like a spectacle, on a grand scale, and pretty frivolous in many ways. So I wanted to take my Biennale project as that kind of effort to reveal what happened to the natives, but also look at the Biennale as a spectacle. And so we put this up right when you came in the checkpoint in customs at Marco Polo. It was right there to greet you to Italy. And I created a series of panels by the Arsenale and the San Marco Piazza. So it was a pretty complicated project, and there's some video you can find on the internet of the whole effort, and there's also a book that was written that Gene Fisher wrote one of the essays for me for that as well, and Lucy Lepard also. So there were a series of panels, and of course it was in Italian, English, and Cheyenne, and so to rementare, to lament or remember what happened, standing bare here in this case, honor the death of, in that case it would be daughter or son, and here we have Nimsham, grandfather. And what I want to draw your attention to is some glass pieces I did. I finished the Biennale project, so I had about 20 panels throughout Venice. Then I had work on the Vaporettos. Then I had the Marco Polo International Airport piece. But I took time when I was finished with installation to work in Murano, and it was just wonderful to work with the glass-blowing maestros in Murano. And so I took the bodies of the warriors and children, and it ended up becoming the shapes on the side of the glass. And I worked for 4 days in Murano. And Jimmy has also worked in the Venice Biennale. And if you have any sense at all, if you're an artist, when you go to Venice, you got to work in Murano. You can't leave without going to Murano. And for me, it was better than working in Venice. It was really wonderful to work with the craftspeople there. That's one of Jimmy's, and it's in the show here as well. But Long Wolf was the first warrior discovered in a burial in London from Buffalo Bill's Wild West shows. And so he was discovered in this crypt or this grave by just a tourist or a person in London. And then they got to wondering, why is there a Sioux from Pine Ridge buried in Brompton Cemetery? And I would go forward and find at least 16 more bodies or burial sites in Europe, and there's many more. So my work was really to memorialize the warriors and 3 children that died in the Wild West shows in Europe. And there was actually a daughter buried in this grave with Long Wolf. There were 3 bodies in this grave. Buffalo Bill bought one grave and put 3 people in it, And it wasn't his daughter either, so it was just another child that died. So here's Long Wolf and his family, kind of a promotional photograph. You have to be very dubious about all these things with guns. So he's putting his gun this way, but it's a staged picture, like the one with Geronimo. And then here are some of the warriors together, and they were pretty youthful. And then a young boy as well here on this side. So I did a lot of research about their deaths, and later when I finished the work in Venice and Murano, I went back through Paris, where they'd been to Paris to perform, and I went to the Parisian morgue and looked through about 20 years of books of death faces and trying to find more Sioux people to try to reveal what happened and hopefully to inspire more research by other scholars to go find these bodies. And the first 3 were repatriated back to Pine Ridge, so they're back reinterred on the reservation in South Dakota. But going back to the vases, the glass, my art practice also is very engaged in my painting practice. And so I've been working on these paintings for about 20 years, and they come out of the land from going back to the reservation and living on the reservation for many years, hunting, walking, watching the trees, particularly the juniper trees. And so that language was transferred to the glass here. And it was difficult, but it became a language transference. Here's one of the paintings. But it wasn't intentional. It happened from my psyche to do so. And I have many paintings, and I I had a show in Singapore about 2 months ago, and I showed 4 new paintings in Singapore, along with the printmaking. But here's the blue one by itself. And it became very ghost-like. It was amazing how they started to spin around that glass and conjure up these spirits to occupy that space back in Italy, where I was. And the hot fire, and Simone and I pulled the glass very quickly. The bodies, we put one dab down, we pulled it like we had like 3 seconds to pull it to make these shapes. And those are the red ones there. So the red ones, fairly successful, I feel. They became more like specimen slides, like bloody slides you look in the microscope or something. And maybe that led to these red monoprints maybe later, perhaps. But being here in Minneapolis, I've been working in Santa Fe last week, and I made about 70 monoprints in Santa Fe in my studio that I like to work with Michael McCabe, a Navajo printmaker, Fourth Dimension Studio. But I was coming to Minneapolis, of course, to talk about what's happened here. And so I wanted to go back and make a couple of prints just for today. And years ago, my mother's nephew, Mitch Walking Elk, he came back to Oklahoma. He's a Tasso. He's a tribal member named Tasso also. But he came back, and he brought from pipestone, from Minnesota, from the Dakota people, he brought a large slab of pipestone. And I was very active with my uncle, who was a ceremonial leader of the tribe. I was his lieutenant. And we brought that stone in and gave it to all the tribal chiefs, Cheyenne, Southern Cheyenne chiefs, for them to make the pipe bowls and to give these prayers to carry. And so that's been transcended. That's happened maybe 15 years ago, a long time ago. Maybe before that, I guess, 20 years ago. But all that work that happened, maybe 30 years ago, I guess, as I get older and older, led me to come back to Minnesota to have a reason to speak here. And then they came back later and gave me a song. And it's from Larry Long, who's a troubadour here in Minneapolis. His album is called, he has many albums, but the album I'm going to share with you later today is called Run for Freedom. And the song in that album, Mitch sings the honor song from the tribe, and the 38 warriors, their names are read by Amos Owen, a ceremonial leader from here. So I made this print about being given that rock and being given that song. And I've also done work in Oregon, and the Modoc tribe has a very sad history as well. They hung their chiefs also in Oregon, and then they shipped them out from Oregon to Oklahoma. So there's Modoc tribe in Oklahoma. So Oklahoma is a sanctuary of 38 native nations that was promised to keep only a native land there. Of course, now it's a state called Oklahoma. They reneged on the treaty. But to choke these chiefs with their hands tied, is a very shameful way to die and be overpowered by numbers. And so I think about that here, and I think about that at Modoc. I did a print about the Modoc Hangings too. So my project here with the Walker, over 20 years ago, I believe, 1990, almost 20 years ago, I was here to do my exhibition called Claim Your Color, which was touring America, a solo show, and had my public art, printmaking, painting, drawing. But after I had the song given to me and the rock, I just had to do more being here. And I asked to work with middle school students from the urban area, native middle school students. And then we worked together. We traveled out to the reservation, and we met chiefs there. We also went to the grave sites. We went to Mankato. We learned about what this meant here. And the youth were descendants from from the warriors that were executed, and the 2 more that Johnson killed. Abraham Lincoln killed the first 38. And so I found a letter Lincoln had written, giving out the phonetic names for those to be murdered. And I worked from his letter, and then I built these sign panels with his moniker at the bottom. He was the one that organized the executive order. But we want to give the name of the warrior. We want to honor the families that have come from that history. We want to allow them a chance to mourn and to heal and move through. But we want to honor those grandfathers, Nimsham. And so I made 40 of these panels, and I put them down the river, and it snowed that day. A really cold day that day. Here they are getting ready to be put up on the poles. And it was an effort too, I would have to say. I did it kind of by myself. There was no staff to help. It was my piece, but there was no staff. Some of the students came, the young people, and they came and helped put the panels on. I'll show you their picture at the end. And we had a nice commemorative event when we finished the work. With the ceremonial leaders came and blessed the piece. And of course, later they would become sites of honoring, with people coming, tribal citizens coming and attaching sweat lodge bundles and feathers, and I think they archived some of that here at the Walker. So the Walker was very generous to sponsor this, and to mention Abraham Lincoln's name, as we've been through this calamity of events here in the last few weeks in Minneapolis. I've looked at the media, and Abraham Lincoln was hardly ever mentioned in any of the media. And he is why he decided to do this. But he's not mentioned. So again, there's sort of the mythological status of non-native leaders in this country. And so I just listed his name at the bottom, and Johnson too as well. So it's a 400-foot piece along that parquet there. And so I'm very excited about perhaps bringing that back, or making a circular configuration, or keeping the same configuration, having it appear on the river. But you have the granaries are here, Pillsbury and Gold Medal are here, and that's the reason why the tribes were brutalized, to create more wheatland. And as you know, most people think the Sioux are in South Dakota. I mean, the people left after such a tragic event, and they were moved out. But for the beginning of this project, in terms of the land, I went and bought 40 pounds of Pillsbury flour, and I marked the ark with 40 pounds of flour. And so every sign's in flour, And then it snowed 6 inches, so you didn't see much of the flour, but that's how I wanted to make that shape, with the instrument that killed the people, and go back to the land being taken and the brutality that followed. And then we had to work with the children. We had the show here inside, and so and we consulted with the elder Amos Owen and others, but we had all that spirit from the rock, from the pipestone, from the song, to guide me to try to bring honor back to what happened. It's hard, but I tried to give honor back. And people, engaged the work, and much of it was not, I guess, realized, by citizens here, non-natives. Didn't know perhaps the history is buried, or it's shameful, so it's buried. And then for Native people too, it's a tough history to engage as well. So that's part of, as you know, part of the quandary of this. But it's called Building Minnesota. And here are 2 of the youth that helped me in the snow, and they came through the project with me to learn about their ancestors. And so I want to close with a song from Larry Long's album I told you about, Run for Freedom. And you're going to hear Amos Owen, the elder, ceremonial leader. He'll read off all 40 names. And then beneath that will be Mitch walking out, giving you the honor song. So I'll pull that up here. Let me get it to work here.
Sung to Gashel Hitched, Washel Gabel, to Gashel, Unshun Damo, Gabo, how Hitched to the Ipi Donicha, Ta Duta, Ta Oyate, Hihashira Koyagmani, Maza Bobdu, Wahpe Duta, Sdodieshni, Khadaya Mani, Tate Miaya, Khadaya Iankaha, Doans A, Hepan, Shunkaska, Tukashitku Ichahadamani, Ite Duta, Kabadecha, Hepi, Mahpia Akanaji, Hanke Dakota, Chaske, Hanke Dakota, Tate Gara, He Inkpa, Hanke Dakota, Nampeshni, Wakantanka, Tukan Shitku Iki Etanaji, Ma Ka Akanaji, Wakute Wiya Yamani, Aichaka, Hotan Iku, Chetan Hunku, Chanka Hada, Hadaya Hihuda, Oyate Aku, Huema Upi, Wakia Chistina, Tate Dihuni.
All right, thank you. Thanks. So I guess we'd have comments with Shanna or questions. Or you come up here and we can share some feedback if you'd like. Yeah.
Do you know what the main cause of death was in Europe for those Wild West shows?
Yeah, in Europe, the main cause of death, a lot of it was illness. Illness because they had to camp everywhere they went, and they weren't really fit for that climate. And then a few times they died from accidents. The one baby got run over by horses. They had a baby on display in a bag, and it fell out. The baby fell out, and then the wagon ran over it, the baby. And then one time the leg was injured. It got to be amputated, then got infected, and so there were accidents within the shows too. And then some of them stayed back, and it's peculiar, but they joined circuses. I mean, America was like a very bad place for Indians in Pine Ridge, so they didn't want to come back. So they stayed and had families in Europe and are still there. There's still descendants there.
I would like to know, if it is known, just how far back in time that medicine circle goes.
How far back the medicine wheel goes? It's I would say about 1,000 years in Wyoming there. Then it would go back to other sites, but that's a pretty active one for about 10 different nations. They still fast there. There's still a place for ceremony at that. It's on top of that mountain, and And it's with the National Forest Service, so there's a good partnership. They close it down for you to go pray. If you come to that site, they'll close it off for Native people to go. I've taken both my sons there. We've been up there, and we can find the same place we dance in that circle where we dance next week. We can find the same spots. It's very accurate. Yeah.
Shanna, I noticed when you showed the poster for Confluence of Tradition, there was what was it, 28 artists or
24.
24 artists. I was struck by I was only familiar with really maybe 3 of them, and I'm curious about where many of those artists are today, if you know from your research.
Well, quite a few have passed on, like Billy Souza, War Soldier. I believe Harry Fonseca was involved as well. Sylvia Lark. A lot of them were just, in their late 60s, 70s. So it's a generation that I think not a lot has been written about, let alone there aren't very many writers that actually, interviewed them at the time and actually structured a way to exemplify their practices within the movement, which is why I focus quite a bit on Jean Fisher's work. But, it's a large task. She kind of focused quite a bit on Jimmy Durham and a few other artists. But I think it's a condition of the field itself in contemporary Native art, art history, etc., that there are more artists rather than writers. And in a lot of cases, as you saw with Durham, a lot of the Native artists had to write about the work themselves and exhibit and curate with each other. So I think now, of course, in my generation, there are a lot more, there's more interest, and there are Native writers that are coming about to kind of close that gap, but there definitely is a lot of work that still needs to be done.
I have a question for Edgar about the work that was shown or is maybe permanently installed outside of the Denver Museum. Mm. And you mentioned that sculpture references a particular ceremonial structure, and I was curious that as the sculpture is it's an abstraction of that particular space, you still decided, you were talking about not wanting to give away too much, and you decided to take 2 of the structural elements that would have been originally in that structure away, and I wondered if you could maybe talk a little bit more about that.
Well, we build that structure every year, so we're getting ready to build it right now, like next week, and then they tear it down. So it's all about renewing the earth. So we don't want to make a permanent idol or church. So the tribe is really against any kind of church. You can have a gatekeeper for, like the Pope. You can have someone be the gatekeeper for religion. So it's really more of a fluid honoring of the environment. So when I made that piece, I had the chiefs come and look at it too, and they liked it, but I still didn't trust it. I still didn't trust that it wasn't appropriate, so I didn't want to make it a form you could actually, build the rafters and make it happen. We don't need it. We don't need another one. We have many of them. We make them every year. So I really was cognizant of not making that as like an elemental form that can be used for that ceremony, and it's turned out pretty well. It's turned out great, in that the communities embraced it and made it kind of a special place from their perspective. But they know what it's kind of coming from because they're from the prairies, so they know the archetype, but also the nomenclature on the outside of it, the notations, the Sand Creek, Wounded Knee. All these things that happened in the West. It's all encompassed there. Fort Marion, what I showed you earlier, all that's there present. So the history of the American experience in the prairies is all there. So that kind of made, I think, people more receptive to it, Native people, So it's worked out pretty well that way, yeah.
I understand that Jimmy Durham prefers not to be known as a Native American artist. Could you say anything about that? Is it that he wants to be an artist who is a Native American, or is he?
You do.
What is that?
Well, it was kind of interesting, and I wrote that paper, I think maybe a year or two ago. And when I reread it again, I had to put in self-described Cherokee artists. Because, of course, I think we've all been reading the papers that it's very controversial from the tribal perspective, those that are Cherokee, that have either researched enough to know that he's not on their rolls, Dada's role. So I'm not very familiar with it. I'm not a Jimmy Durham scholar, but I believe that his work stands the way it is. He's an artist. And, you know, other artists like George Morrison from, you know, this area have also said that they don't want to be known as an Indian artist. They're artists that happen to be Indian. So I think that, you know, their own personal preference has to be respected. And when I think about Durham's work, you know, the 40 plus years that he put into it, and also looking at the impact that he had on various discourses, like Gene Fisher, I think that art is not reducible to identity, that it has to be seen, like she said, as a material realization of, you know, a philosophical act, how you live your life. And I think at this point, because he is actively sought to live outside the U.S. and exhibit outside the U.S., which is why this is his very first retrospective, that he doesn't want to be preoccupied anymore with those debates. And as a Navajo woman myself, from a very different tribe, different perspective, I feel like I don't have the right to tell someone that they're Indian or not, because that's their experience and it's not my business. I know who I am, so yeah. I hope that answers the question.
I want to add something. And, well, certainly I'm a very strong supporter of the Indian Arts and Crafts Act. I think it's a great law, you know, and it's there to protect craftspeople. It's not there for fine art. And it's just tripped up itself in fine art, but that's really not even very important. It's more about protecting crafts workers that had imports coming in being merchandised as Native American. That's what the law was made for. So, like my necklace made by a Cheyenne artist. You know, we're protecting them by that law, so we can't have something from, say, Asia come over in big quantities made by a machine or something and be called Native American, you know. So that's what that law's about, and it's had some problems with being applied to fine art, but it doesn't really stop the venues from having exhibitions of fine art and so on. You just don't have to call it, you know, Native American. And then furthermore, I'm a Cheyenne Arapaho guy from Concho, where I'm going to go on Monday, and so I have to abide by whatever the tribe has said to me. I mean, I have to be 1/4 Cheyenne Arapaho to go there and be enrolled in that nation. And so whatever they decide, I'll go with what they say. And so the government doesn't tell them what to say. You know, the tribe decides what to say. And so, you know, you've got to honor the nation's definition. It's not a personal decision. But for me, I would go deeper and say it's all about your sweat equity back to the community and the people, the folks. And I'm pretty demanding, but if you're not home working with stuff, I don't really need you to do anything because you're worthless. I mean, it's like if you're not home helping the elders, they're cold, they're hot, they don't have money to turn on the heat, they don't have a way to go to the hospital. You know, we have children that are abused, you know, we have babies that die, we got to bury them. We need people home to help us do these things. That's what tribal things are, about a unity of a community. It's not a book or a law, you know. So, and that's fading, but we don't have that problem where I'm from. And I've been to Navajo many times too. So people know who they are, they know what they need to do, you know, and they pitch in and help. They pray for you, they'll guide you, teach you. That's what you want to do. That's what Native America is. And there's something else outside of it that is maybe a little bit lost or misdefined but that's just not very many of that. That's the exception. You know, most people are home in the communities together. You know, like tomorrow we have my sister's birthday party at my house, and everyone's going to come over, and we're going to get together and eat. You know, it's like that kind of experience that is native. You know, it's not a museum's purview. You know, it's not.
Hi, I just want to say, really from the heart, thank you. To both of you, what you began with, the activism, the history, and then where you went in the next part of the talks, it showed the extension of, I think, those early years of activism and into a very deep spiritual practice, an artistic practice that is so unusual because it provides such healing for people by bringing a locus of attention to the past. And this real attention to history that you have was so moving to me. And I want to thank you for not, disregarding the incredible intensity of emotion that history, people go in and out of history. And when you provide a place for people to honor their ancestors or our ancestors, and you bring attention to it in this really beautiful way, it does a lot for people. And so I just want to thank you.
Thank you, Louise.
Yeah, thanks a lot for those words. Thanks. Good.
I guess that's
All right, thanks
Thank
a lot.
you.
Oh. And there's cards here if you want a card. There's a card for everybody. If you'd like to have a print, you can have